Welcome to another episode of Culture 8 Podcast, brought to you by Zini, your trusted partner in building thriving workplace cultures. Here we explore the intricate and dynamic world of organizational culture, uncovering insights and strategies to help leaders and teams foster environments where people and businesses can grow together. Today we are talking with Brett Hillstrom, President at Xeratec Software Development. Welcome to the podcast, Brett. It's an honor to host you today.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Please tell us a little about Xeratec. What's exciting happening at Xeratec today?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. What I'm really excited about right now with Xeratec and the mission we're on, we're a software development company, and for a long time we weren't really on a big focus. About 5 years ago, we made a big pivot and tried to understand the types of teams we really want to affect. And what it brought us to is we really, really love working with blue collar type of companies. And these are usually like civil contracting companies, people who are building our earth. And what problems I see them having, and especially problems I think that long term I want to make sure that we are the best solution for, is people started applying technology to every problem. And it doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it does. But what happened is some construction companies are spending, let's say $50,000 to $100,000 a year in software tools that they don't really like. Sometimes they have 8 to 10 different tools. Sometimes they have one, but nothing. And I shouldn't say that globally. Some organizations are doing just fine, but a lot of organizations are getting incredibly frustrated by how this world of software has evolved for them. And really, our mission is to make sure that we can build something that works exactly for them, and ideally for a cost that's comparable to what they're paying now, which is where we've got some challenges to work through. But I'm really excited about that because I think it's a game changer for construction as we move forward.
I like that, and I agree with you. So I think when these blue collar companies or companies have that orientation or the expertise in construction, they don't necessarily understand technology, and they probably might not even get the right hires who actually help them through this process, because maybe this is my assumption, some of the best probably won't work in a construction company, and they'll probably go try to work at Google or Apple or even any other software company, I suppose. So yeah,
absolutely. And there are some incredible people in construction. There are some incredibly high-tech people in construction. But that hasn't just not necessarily the focus of that industry, nor should it be. It's more of a supporting tool. Where if you go into more of a white-collar industry, it's been more of a focus to try to replace different roles and things over time. So it makes sense why these companies aren't as incentivized to try to recruit people like that would go to Google, and why people that would go to Google wouldn't really seek these kinds of companies.
Yeah, that's a good challenge. That's a pretty decent understanding of. Well, so before we deep dive into your views and beliefs about organizational culture, I would like to ask you a question that will allow my audience to get to know you better. What was your very first job?
Oh, my very first job. So I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin in Kenosha County, for people who know the Midwest. And the area is pretty big in dairy farming. And we lived out in the country. My brother worked on a dairy farm, and he decided he wanted to move out at the age of 16. But he needed to find a replacement for somebody who's going to take his job. So instead of me, going and getting an interview or anything like that, he just took me to work with him and taught me what to do. And he said, "Here, this is your job now." So I spent a little bit of time working on a dairy farm, and that work is incredibly hard, especially when you're 13 and hay bale's way heavier than you do.
Yeah.
But it was awesome. I loved it. After you get used to the hard smells and things like that, it's just, for some reason, you don't mind getting up at 4 a.m. to milk cows. You got to milk them twice a day.
Yeah.
Hay season is a blast. You get to learn to drive cars and tractors and all this stuff, and you're barely even a teenager. And that was a really fun job.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty cool story. So let's take a deep dive into organizational culture now. And before that, I want to just set a context to the set of questions that I want to ask you. Like I was trying to tell you earlier on, we've met through because I saw a post on LinkedIn about what you mentioned about Xeratec's journey. You were talking about hiring smart people, but not to have the ability to, or rather, the team work together was not cohesive, and that was some of your learnings. You've had situations where you've learned about what culture really is about in an organization. You've talked about in your post about the mistakes and intentional learning, and I love the word intentional because that's what you need to be. But you talked about all of that, and that's what led me to bring about this conversation. And I thought that I wanted to present that journey that you've gone through together with your team to the state that of where you're protecting your culture of your organization. And I wanted to share that with my audience, and that's why we are here. So to start with, you wrote candidly about not understanding culture in Xeratec's early days. When did you first realize that something was off? Was it a moment or a conversation or a pattern that made you pause?
Yeah, I think this one might require a little bit of context. And I think it'll be helpful for a lot of different people. So I don't remember where I read this stat. It's probably a lie. But the majority of small businesses are started by, call it like a technician type of role. Whether you're like a talented software engineer, you're a talented mechanical engineer, something of that nature. A lot of these individuals are working in a corporate environment, and they see an opportunity to go on their own. They've got
Right.
a large deck of relationships. They've got a lot of experience. They're very good at what they do. So they start their own business, and they take on work. They need to hire somebody. And a lot of times the first couple hires are people you know pretty well, and it's not as challenging. And that's really the story of Xeratec. This was started by my dad. This is a multi-generational business. And he is an amazing technician. He is brilliant. And he'll admit to this, just like anybody else that jumps into that role, what they're really good at is the job, right? They don't understand necessarily what it actually means to build an organization. And there's no fault to them. It's just, it's something you don't know.
Yep.
So he started the Xeratec in about 2003 on his own. I actually started with him in 2005. I was still in high school. And I think he decided to pay me to stay out of trouble. Instead, I got to start to learn how to program, which was awesome.
Right.
And then he hired two other people part-time, and they were old friends of his, so he knew who they were. And really, we were a 4 to 5 man company until maybe about 2013. And that's when, we had several lessons behind us. We're like, okay, how do we start to grow this? When we figured out how to grow, we grew from, maybe 5 to 6 people to almost 30 people in probably a 2-year time span. And, at the beginning, it seemed fine. We had a bunch of projects coming in, and we were able to just start knocking them out. And now it's about how do we start getting more and more smart people. And it didn't seem like just an initial moment. It was just like a slow fade of our culture. That initial team we had that was pretty tight knit, that worked well together. Now each one of us was trying to lead different projects. We weren't really, together anymore as far as that core group. But we didn't really know exactly how to hire either. So we hired a lot of people based on their technical competence.
Right.
And all of a sudden there were just little skirmishes that started. Just little friction areas, I'll call them, that slowly started to fester. They got bigger and bigger and bigger, and honestly, for a little while, it almost felt like we had two sides of our office, where one side just didn't care for the other side, and it started to create, gossip and other things that just created this really toxic environment where
Right.
it was like a slow fade, and it was very depressing to be a part of.
Mm.
I did not like to be there.
Mm. Um, First of all, going back to your starting about how people start organizations, I think that is pretty much the situations. In fact, some they have these technical skills. They want to do great work for organizations. They see the problem, and you're right. They're so focused on it. They've not been trained. They've not seen how organizational culture or organizations or group of people work together, or what are the dynamics that need to be managed. So, and they learn over time. Some people learn it. Some people hire people to, like consultants such as myself, to help them through it. But you're right. And one thing that I've also learned is, over time, talking to so many leaders, I've realized that the one thing is for sure, that they also try to build organizations where maybe they've worked at some other places and they've seen something which they didn't like. They wanted to make sure that when they started their own company, that is not going to happen over here, right? That's part of the organizations or technical organizations that I've talked to and worked with. And this is something which, I have a webinar coming up, and obviously this is a recorded session. It's going to be released in November 15th or so, but I have a webinar today. We are talking about just that same situation: scaling organizational culture. Because you start off early, you're working well together because you're a small team, you're on the table, you can make decisions together, you're able to convince each other to follow the purpose of the organization. But as you grow, that starts to disintegrate. It's like a tight knit rope that starts to fray and open up, right? So the directions move to different focuses and so on. And that friction and conflict that you brought up, that's a huge, huge, huge point. When I started this company in organizational culture, some of the things that I understood were very common interventions. So culture is like a river. You have to be intentional about where it goes. And you do that by introducing interventions. And some of the things that I've known and understood as common interventions is conflict resolution. Not that conflict is bad. Conflict is hugely important for the innovation capabilities of an organization. However, conflict needs to be managed so that we all, first of all, we all know that we are all working in the same team for the same purpose, and we are going to grow together. But we need to understand different perspectives, because there's not just one way to solve a problem. There's multiple perspectives out there, and we can probably use the insight. The world is too complex for us to just say that I'm the leader, I'm going to make the decision, and this is how we're going to do it, right? So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty powerful story.
You're welcome.
You also mentioned in your post that you, I think maybe this is, you might have answered partly, but you made a lot of mistakes, or rather the company made a lot of mistakes, but there was a lot of intentional learning. Can you share one or two specific mistakes that taught you the most about the culture and leadership?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that comes to mind is, obviously I talked about how we started hiring people based upon their talent,
Mm.
um, and their technical competency, which is
Mm.
important. I don't want
Mhm.
to diminish the need for that.
Correct.
Um, but I think something that is equally important, something I didn't know early on, and I don't think our organization really knew early on, is what the other side of a person should look like that works well with our organization. And I want to kind of state that it's not that we like there's great people we won't hire, even great people, ethically in those areas. It's just we didn't understand at that point what we wanted to find in a person, those soft values, the different attributes, the behaviors that are natural to them. And, you know, I really like to model other companies. And I look at I like the company like Dave Ramsey runs. I like Chick-fil-A. I like some of these other organizations because they've been able to replicate culture and grow it. And it's really that collection of behaviors and attributes they look for in the people. And then the behaviors that they require these people to live by. And then the mission that they're all supposed to be on together. And without defining that, everything just happens. And a culture is going to be there. It's just not. You might get lucky, but I doubt it. But really, we didn't know even how to define what that great side of a person looked like for Xeratec. What does it mean to be a part of our tribe?
Right.
And that just kept leading us down these paths where we'd hire only based upon technical competence. And a lot of times, the smartest people are sometimes the hardest people to work with in an organization, sadly.
Yeah.
Because they're incredibly high performers and they expect everybody to have the same kind of competence as them.
Yeah.
And and I can understand that, but it doesn't mean that it works well when you're trying to grow a bigger company.
Right. I think that's a very important point. Anything else you want to add or something?
Yeah, I think maybe kind of after you kind of have a thought about this, I've got another mistake that I made during that process. But
fair enough. And really, you've understood it. Culture fit, the behaviors that the organization needs. We always talk about organizational culture as a definition. The culture of an organization is the shared learning of that group as it solves the problems that it faces, both externally and internally. And then it finds success in those learnings where they've found success. That's what they teach to the new team members, as this is the way to feel, perceive, behave in relation to the challenges of the organization. So what you're talking about, culture fit and the behaviors, it's you're right on the money. That's exactly what you would learn. And I love that that's like a lesson learned from you guys. This is like real world, something that you've learned. We're going to be conscious of when we hire people. Yes, you're technically great. Awesome. We need obviously folks like that. However, during the hiring process, you're able to not completely, but get a understanding and realization, but at least just knowing where you are. And over time, within 3 months, 6 months, or you will get to know if that individual is a good fit or not. You're able to make a decision where everyone is able to thrive, not just you or the other individual. It's if the individual is not a good fit, that means they're not going to grow here. And the objective is to grow for everybody together. So realizing that faster is much better for your company as well as that individual as well, because we all need to grow together. It's like a garden. If this is not suitable for me, I much rather I move out and grow somewhere else. And obviously, same thing goes for the garden as well, or for the organization. These learnings, these shared learnings, become your basic assumptions, and the idea is that these are shared mental models. You make your decisions subconsciously. You don't even know why you're making decisions over time. It's just that this is the way we do out here. You must have heard this common phrase. So certain times, yes, this is the way you do things out here, but knowing why you do these is very crucial for organizations. So people, or rather for consultants like myself, this is one of the primary things how we start. We try to understand by figuring out organizational culture's basic assumptions, because using that, we understand what is the strength and what are the weaknesses, and use the strength to then start to create those interventions. Remember, I said culture is like a river. You have to be intentional to steer it to a generative direction. But thank you. Share, please. You said something else as well. There was another lesson learned that you guys had.
Yeah, and this is more around, we had built this organization. We had this culture that I would say was ideal, and then there was a realization that this isn't good.
Hmm.
But now what, right?
Hmm.
How do we change this? And you talked about like a catalyst or something that can kind of push it in a direction.
Hmm.
We and I think it's fair to call all this a journey.
Yeah.
I can't call myself formally educated, especially on culture or any of these things. These are all built just because there's a necessity, and we needed to pour into ourselves to learn a different way. And it was a lot of mistakes through this process.
Hmm.
But you've got a culture that's not ideal. Well, how do you get it to the spot where you think is ideal?
Hmm.
And so we started to understand like what kind of things would be important, but to have in our team. But it's so easy to look at like, what is my team right now? Like,
Yeah.
trying to almost protect that bad thing that you have. And I don't want to call it all bad. There's just,
Yeah.
you almost instinctively try to protect what you built.
Hmm.
This is my mess, so I'm just going to keep it.
Hmm.
So you start to try to understand what kind of behaviors does the team already have, and that's not necessarily the right track. It's more around what behaviors should the team have, and it
Yes.
might mean that there's several people in your team that won't be here when the other side of the culture exists.
Hmm.
And it was it's like an emotional roller coaster almost, where you have to make that realization and understand that there's really, really hard things you need to do to change the direction of the ship.
Yeah.
There's a few tears that were cried through this process. There's several fights. It was not always pretty,
Hmm.
but you can't try to like just bring the whole team into that conversation and say, well, what kind of culture should we have? Because a lot of the team's not going to share the culture that you need to define.
Hmm.
But there is an element of, after you define, okay, here's the culture, how can you bring your team into that
Hmm.
and help them buy into what should this look like and help them shape it a little bit with you. But the hard part of that is several people that might be a part of that might not actually fit your team.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just something that I think we let go on for far too long. And that's really the mistake. Is once you define this, you've got to almost have a crusader mindset to say, like, we're going to fix this, and it's going to be hard.
Hmm.
And it's not really that hard once you identify your culture, but identify who really doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But it is not easy to let that person go. It's
Yeah.
never easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. They become part of your identity, and that's what culture really is. It's the identity of the group together. This is really powerful. Um, when you were speaking about it, I almost thought about, like, yes, this is the culture that I have. Then you start thinking about it, and then you start to think about the medical question: what would I really like it to be? And then the realization that I see through your conversation is also the fact too that culture really isn't, and this is something I say that often. I borrowed it from a CEO of Board River Retail, Charlie Maloff, and he talks about it often. Culture really is not a microwavable event. It's a crock pot approach. It takes a long time to make those changes. Um, Having those people that have carried you through this journey and were there together might not necessarily stay there, because you are constantly evolving as an organization, you're as a culture. What happens is we all carry biases, our own mental models, and if we are unfortunately not comfortable changing them, that becomes a situation where two individuals or entities have to part ways. Otherwise they're just going to be interweave and but not really progressing together, right? So Peter Senge wrote this book called Fifth Discipline about learning organizations and the 5 disciplines that are needed for organizations to become a learning organization. But in his book, he talks about people, or rather organizations, in order for them to grow and succeed, they have to change their mental models. And I also follow a gentleman called Edgar H. Sheehan. He's a notable authority on organizational culture. He's done seminal work on organizational culture in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so on. But he talks about basic assumptions. The definition I gave you, that's basically from him. And basic assumptions and shared mental models are the same thing. So in order for us to change, really, we have to be able to change our shared mental models in order for us to grow. It's almost culture is really like it's like a body. It has both stable, the bones, and dynamic aspects, the cells and bodily functions that are changing rapidly. Even the bones actually are changing slowly. However, they can actually, during a severe impact or situation, they can break, right? And then you have to create a new situation, new body, a new organization culture. So fantastic. I like that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, Looking back, what assumptions about leadership or performance did you have to unlearn?
Um, yeah, I think, and obviously I started young, was probably put in positions earlier than well, call it earlier than you should have, but sometimes people need that just to have the catalyst to grow.
Yeah.
Um, when I was younger, I thought leadership meaning being the man with every answer. You're the highest performer. Everybody looks up to you because you're so good at what you do, right? And where there's an element of that that's important, the technical, your technical competence is important. What I learned as I progressed, and I think part of this is after I had kids, I learned caring for people is a little bit more important than knowing exactly what to do.
Yes.
And just trying to be that guy who's got it all figured out and going a million miles an hour. Really, sometimes you end up looking a little bit stupid. And I learned now that leadership's more around creating clarity around who are we as an organization, who's in this organization, how do we live in this organization, how do we as leaders lead our teams, and even down to we do weekly one-on-ones with everybody in the company.
Love it.
And
Yeah.
the goal of that, and part of this is I steal content from everybody. So I'm going to steal this from John Maxwell. Is his 5 levels of leadership. The first level to lead anybody is to have a relationship with them. And if you can't take a moment every week, even 15, 20 minutes, to sit down with somebody that is on your team and get to know who they are, what they're going through, maybe it's something at home, how do you truly have influence with them if you don't truly care and if you don't really have a relationship with them? And that's just the first step. I think obviously having a position over them is important. Hierarchies are important. They need to know who to go to, who's setting direction. That's important. But caring for your team and understanding what challenges they're going through, helping them get through challenges. A lot of times they're just like, hey, I don't know how to handle this conflict with this customer. How would you go through something like this? Hey, I've been really struggling. My wife's been sick or something like that. It's if you can't spend that time to understand that about your team,
Yeah.
I just don't understand how you can actually lead them because you don't know what they're going through.
Wow. In just one questions, few words, you've brought about some really, really important points. Having all the answers is not possible. Who am I? I'm not God. I've not read throughout every time. I'm not constantly working. I'm also a human being. Cannot have all the answers. I have my own biases. I have my own learned experiences. that guide how I make decisions, but it's not necessarily the right thing because the world is too complex. So having that different perspectives together to solve problems, amazing. Clarity is one of the most important things that a leader can provide. There's this lady, Erin Meyer. She is a professor in Europe, and she wrote this book, No Rules Rules, with by Reed Hastings, along with Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, and they talk about inverting the leadership triangle or triangle of an organization to rather think of leadership as the roots of a tree that provides the boundaries and the context. And you have the trunks and the branches as your executive leadership, your managers, and you have the leaf node as the ones who create the value. The job of leadership is to provide clarity in these boundaries and contexts. And so the clarity starts to increase further as it goes up. You also talk about one-on-ones, and this is one of the first articles I wrote about when I started my company back in 2024 was about managers' advice to managers. Like, really, I understand you guys had technical skills and you've been promoted, and now you have to work with people. People are not the same as machines. People are complex adaptive agents. And if you notice, I talk a lot about complexity. I'm a student of complexity. In fact, I can share the book, right? It stays right in front of me. It's Complexity, the science at the edge of order and chaos. So we are all complex adaptive agents. We group together to form complex adaptive systems and building blocks to further complex adaptive systems and so on. And we keep interacting and keep changing the entire environment around us. But going back to the fact that you've had that early opportunity and understanding of having these one-on-ones as the important part, and that's what was the advice in my article as well. One-on-ones are very crucial for building your trust with the organization, with your team, with your people. And you've also mentioned about one of the beautiful concept that you mentioned is the relationships. Edgar Etcheen, the gentleman I mentioned, he talks about 4 levels of relationships. One is the jailer and jailee. There's no trust. The level 1 is your transactional relationships. I'll do business with you, you do business with me, and we're done after the business. We don't have anything. But that was what we used to have. What has now become necessary is to have level 2 relationships where you're able to trust me, I'm able to trust you, you've got my back, I've got your back. We're working in this together, growing together. And level 3, of course, is the intimacy, the spouses, the family, and so on. So I love the fact that you've gone through life experiences and picked up all these great skills and great knowledge and learnings on real life experiences, and I think it's going to stick with you forever. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think so, and I think especially one-on-ones are key to, obviously you talk about relationships, and I'll kind of give a little bit of a context on what I do in a one-on-one. I always start with the personal side. I want to get to know who they are, what they're doing, what they're going through. I want to know if they're, having a child or getting a puppy. It doesn't matter. It's all awesome.
Yeah.
Or if they're struggling with something.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about their work.
Yeah.
I want to hear, like, what are they struggling with? Do they have what they need? Is there anything I can, get out of their way? Anything that's a challenge? Anything that they want to grow into? And then I always end this, and I actually stole this from a conference I was at only a year ago. And I call it the red, yellow, green. And it forces us as leaders to provide constructive feedback and to let them know if they're doing what we expect.
Yeah.
And it was really cool when we started doing this. And so some of the things that I've implemented, it's not necessarily because I know they'll work. I feel like they will, and then I'm always pleasantly surprised. But it forces me as a leader to be clear on what my expectations are. And let's say I'm meeting with somebody every week, and for 8 weeks in a row, they're red. Red means that they're not hitting my expectations, and I have to be clear about what that means. And it's hard for me to do that.
Yep.
But it's worse if I don't actually talk about it, because I like to call that sanctioned incompetence. You're allowing things in your organization that you know you don't want.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes hard as a leader to do that course correction, but it's become something that we require in our one-on-ones, because it forces us to stay on top of what we deem as important. Sometimes it's competence level, sometimes it's core value level. But what happens is we've actually had 2 people decide to leave because of this, but it was the right thing for the organization. And it's just a way to, how do you start to uphold these values that you define? How do you uphold, what's important, the experience you provide to your customers, these different things. And it's, if you want to be able to have a good organization, you've got to be constantly pushing it in the direction you want it to go. And that's, each individual needs to know, are they hitting the mark? And most weeks people are green. Sometimes if they're yellow, it's like, hey, I think you're doing a good job, but hey, watch out for this. I noticed it. It's not a big deal yet, but I want you to know that I've seen it. If it's red, it's like, okay, we're going to have to continue this conversation every week.
Yeah.
This is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't want to keep going down this path if it's not going to shape into the right direction. And it's a weekly conversation about that thing. And it's not, it'll naturally help you shepherd this organization. Sometimes you will make that hire incorrectly,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't keep it there.
Yep.
And it's just a really cool tool, I think was worthy sharing.
Thank you. And that's a very powerful tool. That actually is really practical approach towards ensuring that there is alignment, right? There's clarity. Obviously, that's the leader's job to provide clarity. But then the whole practice of talking about where the expectation is, and you can't really. I like how you said it. That like I have to constantly think about what my expectation is, so that I can be clear about it with my team. Because if you're not clear and you're just expecting, and like, what, I'm in on your team, I'm not a mind reader, I don't know what you want. So I love it. I love the fact that you are able to do this in a very practical way. So thank you for sharing that. I'm grateful for my on behalf of my audience as well.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
I like that in your post that you describe the culture as now as something that your team defends. What does that really look like in a daily practice? How do they recognize when something doesn't fit?
Yeah, I think first, I think it actually goes back to the hiring process. So we used to have more just technical interviews. You get hired, you're good. Now we actually do 3 rounds of interviews. And the purpose of this is I want the team or our tribe to be able to have multiple touch points. And it's not the same people in every interview. First, I'll myself or somebody else will do an initial conversation to feel like, I think this person has a lot of the traits we look for. Mm-hmm. And we stole a tool from, we implemented several aspects of the entrepreneurial operating system. And there's a tool that they provide called the People Analyzer. Mm-hmm. And they try to help you objectively score a subjective thing like behaviors. It's very subjective, but they try to give you an objective way to score that, and with a tool called the People Analyzer. So they have you list out your core values and behaviors that you hire on, and you grade each one of them with a plus, minus, or a minus, and every single one has a bar, right? One of our behaviors, which is a unique one, is like figure outable. We want problem solvers on our team. But it's hard for somebody to bring that every moment of every day. Yep. So that one might be like a plus minus. That's our bar. If you're below that, it means you're not going to be very a dynamic problem solver. And we try to gauge that during the interview process. But we list out our core values. And then we also list down another tool from EOS is the get at one, a capacity to do it. We want to gauge, like, do they really understand what this role is?
Mm.
Do they have the twinkle in their eye about this? Is this really something that lights them up?
Mm.
And then do we feel like they've got the capacity to do this? Do they have the technical skills? And the funny thing is, like, the capacity portion is all we used to interview for. Now it's like one of 8 attributes.
Nice.
And then, there's a one more score added to this, and this is my own flavor, and it's a gut feel. And I don't know where I picked this up, and I think there's something about limbic marketing and the limbic brain.
Mm-hmm.
In the limbic brain, from what I understand, and I'm not a neurologist, and I'm probably wrong on this, but it controls your feelings and your emotions and things that you can't necessarily rationalize.
Yep.
But there's a lot more power and computing strength to your limbic brain than what you can rationalize.
Yep.
So if you go through this and everything's checking the boxes, but for some reason your gut says, I just don't know about this one.
Yep. I agree.
Wow. That's actually sometimes your indicator that actually says this is the wrong fit. But I want to make sure that you actually ask that question, like, what does your gut say?
Yeah.
So we implemented, this tool set, we put our own spin on it, but every layer of that interview process, everybody who's been a part of that is actually trained on how to try to score this and how to ask questions to try to digest, do they have these traits?
Mm.
And is it perfect? Probably not. Absolutely not. But the results have been speaking for themselves. We have hired some of the smartest, but not just the smartest people. We've started being able to bring these team members in front of clients, and honestly, they're way better than I am. And it's not what we want. So it's really cool. And after we go through each round of interviews, we actually all sit around our conference table, and I call it thumbs up, thumbs down. And so everybody goes through this process to formulate a stronger opinion on, is this the right person to hire?
Right.
And it requires a unanimous thumbs up. If there's a thumbs down, it's from anybody, it's immediate disqualification. If it's a thumb sideways, it's why? Let's talk about this more. Like, maybe there's just something that they want to dissect a little further. Maybe it means there's another conversation that needs to be had. Mm-hmm. But what this does is it allows the entire team to have power. Mm-hmm. And do I want to accept this person into my tribe? Mm-hmm. So once they're part of the tribe, there's a different expectation now. Is like they're part of your team. Mm-hmm. You need to perform with them. Yeah. And they know this. They know the consequence of not having the right team members as well. So it's helpful. But we've been doing that for a couple of years, and we don't do a lot of hiring. We're not a very big company yet. But it's amazing how effective that's been. Just creating that clarity on who do you want on your team. Yeah. And training the team to do that, but then giving them the power to make the decision. And the last hire we made, I purposely was not a part of any interview, and I just sat in the last meeting with the thumbs up, thumbs down, just to see what the team did. And it was really, really cool to see them. This is their team now. Yeah. Which is cool. It was really neat.
I love it. So many, again, very powerful things that you touched upon. The job of a leader to grow his or her team. And again, Peter Singer talked about a few leaders bringing that aspect of, we want the ferment in management is going to continue until the leadership understands that their job is really to grow their people, both professionally and spiritually. That's a huge important aspect of it. Growing people, as individuals, as humans. That's a part of job. Not many leaders probably understand that. But I really like this, that you've given that you're really creating leaders. You're not really creating followers. You're creating leaders. And like you mentioned, that you don't, I don't know if I understood this right, but I think you might have said this, that you obviously want people who are being hired better than you as yourself. because that's what you want in your organization. That's amazing. There's so much more I could cover, but I think I'm gonna jump to some rapid fire questions. There were two more questions, but this has been such a great conversation that I think I missed track at the time. But I want to ask you a few more rapid fire questions. What book do you recommend the most?
Um, Something incredibly practical. And the funny thing is, it reads like a children's book. It's a book called The Chameleon, and you can build this great culture with the right kind of people, the right kind of behaviors.
Hmm.
But what you don't realize, what I had to learn through the process, is everybody's still different. Everybody communicates differently. Everybody's got different styles.
Yeah.
And there's a saying in that book is like, you don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are.
Hmm.
And it's about the disc profiles, and and it's all about communication profiles and stressors and things of that nature. And I really recommend that book, and I really recommend people implement something like DISC to help with, inner office communication and conflict, and how to go through things appropriately and how to empathize with different types of people. Very powerful.
Yep, I totally agree. That's a great recommendation. What's one thing people would would be surprised to learn about you?
That I'm from a very large family. I've got 15 brothers and sisters, all from the same parents, which is probably a little
Yeah.
crazy for a lot of people. And so I'm one of 16, and I think that's probably why I'm such a scrappy kid.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, I come from India, so my father. I mean, not that we have that in our generations today, but my father's father, my grandfather had 11 kids, two marriages, but 11 kids. There was a huge family out there. So I hear you. That's pretty cool. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, they can. I think the best way is probably to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try to make sure that people know who I am. I try to post consistently, but also if you reach out in a private chat, unless you're going to spam me with a sales message, I'm really usually happy to engage in a conversation, and I love meeting new people. So don't be afraid to reach out. I'll probably actually solicit you for a Teams call just to introduce myself.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it, folks. An amazing conversation. I could probably talk to, and which probably I'll do. Keep talking to Brett about organizational culture. There's so much to learn from him. And thank you, Brett, for being on my podcast. I really appreciate all the wisdom and conversation that you brought to the table. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The work you're doing here is really important.